I just feel like I need to have like a beard and a prospector hat drinking this beer.
What's going on, beer lovers? Welcome to another episode. I'm Jeff.
I'm Justin. Today we are in the heart of the city by the bay, San Francisco, California, at their oldest craft brewery, Anchor Brewing. Now, we all know that they're world-renowned for their steam beer, but we know that there's a lot of other beers here that we're gonna try today that are just as good. So, Jeff, are you ready?
Let's have some beer.
Let's have some beer. Alright guys, so I have the Anchor Steam beer here, the one that everyone knows here for San Francisco and Anchor Brewing. Done the old school style, one of the first beers that were out post-prohibition. So here we go, guys. It's a crisp, light lager. It tastes like history. You can, I don't know, when you're tasting it, you get those malts, you get that flavor, that crispness, that freshness. But at the same time, you feel like you're drinking something special. It's historic. You can feel the history in every sip. And it's delicious. I mean, it is the quintessential San Francisco beer. And if you've never tried it, make sure you try it because this is an all-American original and it's good to the last drop.
All right, guys, so the next beer up is going to be Anchor Brewing's Summer Wheat. This was originally released in 1984. This is their seasonal summer beer. Let's try it. So the aroma itself is super sweet. It's floral. You could tell that it's just a delicious sweet wheat beer just right off the nose itself. Let's try it. Oh. This tastes like summer. It's got great wheat notes to it. It's a little bit floral in the body itself. And then it's got like a lemon zest to it. It tastes like something I would want to drink on a rocking chair watching the sunset on a nice warm summer day.
Alright guys, so I have here the California Lager. It's a 4.9% lager, and this was started in 2012. A portion of the proceeds go to California parks, and the recipe is based off an old school recipe from the mid-1800s out in Truckee, California. So I can't wait to try it, guys. Cheers. I just feel like I need to have like a beard and a prospector hat drinking this beer. You get so much history. It tastes old school. It tastes like something your grandpa would drink, but that's in a very good way. You have all these newfangled lagers with all these complex flavors. This tastes like a good, simple, old-fashioned lager. Those malts are there. The crispness is there. It's clean, finishes clean, and it is just a solid lager.
All right, guys, I'm extremely honored to try this next beer. It's called Liberty Ale. This is the first ever post-prohibition IPA that came out of America. On top of that, this is the first ever IPA that used dry hopping. This is like trying a piece of American history. I'm really honored to try this. I can't wait to see what it tastes like. Cheers. Wow. This is not your traditional IPA. It's still definitely got the bitterness. There's the Cascade hops that's in the body, blends with the malts beautifully, but it's not your Stone IPA. It's not a West Coast. It's not an overwhelming hop flavor. This process that they use making this Liberty Ale, they really found a way to blend the malts with the hops and create a harmonious connection between the two. This is a great beer. I'm really happy I got to try it.
All right, guys, so we have something really special that's not normally on tap here at the brewery, but we're lucky enough to try it. It is the BLA IPA. So San Francisco, big Giants town, have that heated rivalry against the Dodgers, so Anchor decided to make a beer to commemorate that. So this is not normal production. This is just for their beer garden down by AT&T Park, and we get to try it. Cheers. Okay, so it's definitely more hoppy than the Liberty IPA that we've had, but that being said, it's not overly hoppy. It's not a dank beer. You get those hops, you get a good amount of malt, and it's everything is just refined, just so clean. The bitterness lasts with you a little bit, but it's not overwhelming. This is definitely the beer you want to have at a ballpark, and you know, AT&T Park, watching a Giants game, hoping that the Dodgers lose. Well, I mean, we can agree with that. I'm an Angels fan, so you know what, Giants? Go Giants. Beat LA.
Okay, guys, the next beer up is going to be the Anchor Porter. Now, believe it or not, this is the beer that saved Anchor Brewing. The reason why is because when Fritz Maytag took over this brewery, he produced this beer right here in 1972. By 1975, this was in mass production, and it's what brought this brewery from going bankrupt to being one of the biggest breweries in San Francisco. I'm excited to try it. Let's see how it tastes. Cheers. This tastes like, that's what I'm looking for. This tastes so natural. This tastes so real. You are getting nothing but the delicious malts in this beer. They use those roasty, toasty, chocolatey malts in this, and man, that flavor just comes through. You can tell why this was one of the first craft beers ever produced after the Prohibition. It's light, but it's got such a strong body to it and a super clean finish. It just leaves this nice, warm presence in your mouth as you're drinking it. It's smooth, it's flavorful. You really taste the ingredients in this beer, and for that reason, I have to say this is probably one of my favorites here at Anchor Brewing.
All right, guys, so last up I have the Blood Orange Blonde. This is one of their newest releases. Comes in can form, and it is probably one of their nice weedier beers, and I love my Blood Orange and citrus, so I can't wait to try it. Cheers, guys. Okay, not a lot of smell, not a lot of aroma, but you're expecting that. It's a blonde. It's not going to be overly aromatic, but the taste, so refreshing. It's a great blonde, and you get that blood orange flavor right at the back of your throat. It is delicious. It's citrusy, and it's very, very drinkable, like everything else that you get here at Anchor. It is one of the preeminent breweries in America. I mean, it's sad that we think of like some of the big boys before we think of Anchor, but they deserve to be put on that plateau and that echelon of those top-end old school breweries, and just some of the best stuff that we've had tasting by far is here at Anchor Brewing. Cheers, guys.
So the next beer I'm drinking is called Blackberry Days IPA. This is one of their newer beers. It just got produced recently, and it's got nice dark color to it. So far, I've really loved their IPAs. It's very old school. This sounds like more of a new school take on their IPAs. So let's see how it tastes. Cheers. So this almost doesn't even taste like an IPA. You're definitely getting the bitterness of the hops, but at the same time, it's sweet. It's got that blackberry flavor to it. The malts are extremely light and uplifting. It's kind of refreshing to drink, which I'm not typically used to with an IPA. I mean, it's like a soft IPA. The bitterness is definitely there, but I feel like the sweetness actually kind of takes this over. Still a really good beer. Even after I haven't taken a sip for a while of this beer, I can still get the blackberry on my tongue. It's such unique flavor, such unique beer. This is definitely a great old school take on a new school style.
All right, guys, so we have a tour booked here, and Mike, one of the employees here at Anchor Brewing, is going to give us a tour and a little bit of the history of Anchor Brewing right now. Check it out.
Here at Anchor begins in the late 1800s with two German immigrants named Ernst and Otto. They are pictured right over there on the wall, and they came to San Francisco like many people did back in those days in search for gold, but quickly discovered that finding that gold was no guarantee. But what was a guarantee was, people wanted to drink beer. So they decided to open up that brewery pictured right beneath them there. That was located on Pacific and Larkin in the Russian Hill District, and they opened that up in 1896. We're celebrating 121 years in San Francisco this year, specifically in April. So we were making this beer back then called steam beer, and there were about 35 to 40 other breweries during this same time period all making the same style of steam beer. And the reason why all these breweries were making the same type of beer was because they were all limited in the same resource. And that resource was the ability to cool things down. So basically, refrigeration wasn't invented yet, ice was not readily available, / definitely was not prioritized for making beer. And more importantly than that is San Francisco didn't have cold enough winters out here to just brew beer during the winter and let that coolness of the winter cool that down like other parts of the United States are doing, like in the Midwest and East Coast. So the brewers out here had to get creative with how they would cool down that hot sugary liquid called wort, which is essential in the brewing process. And their solution was to build these giant vessels called cool ships. And they're about the size of this room, about 1.5 feet, 2 feet deep. Just think giant wooden kiddie pool, and they would put that up on the roof of the breweries. So 10 years after we had opened in 1906, that was the year of the first major earthquake here in San Francisco. Luckily for us, we did not go down in the shakes of that quake. We did, however, burn down in the fires very shortly after, so not a quite complete escape from the quake. But we had rebuilt right over here, pretty much on the other side of these houses there on 18th Street in Hampshire. And we were there for a few years till we met that same fate. We also burned down there as well. And then we bounced around to a few more locations until we finally settled in the Soma District for many years until we moved into this building here in 1979. But going back to the early 1900s in 1907, that was the year after that major earthquake. One of our original founders, Mr. Otto Schenkel, on the bottom there, he met his very unfortunate and untimely death. He was actually hit and killed by a cable car out here. Actually cut in half by that cable car. Yeah, pretty intense. There was a huge trial as to whether the conductor was at fault for that incident. So because of that, it's very well documented. And if you're curious as to what happened during that incident, be sure to talk to me during the tasting. I'll save you the details now if you just had breakfast or anything like that. It was a little bit of a gruesome story. So moving on to 1920. That was the year that Prohibition was now enacted here in the United States. So it is now officially illegal to produce, drink, or even say think about alcohol here in the United States. So now all these, breweries, wineries, distilleries are having to make the switch to making legal things with their ingredients like ice cream, candy, soda. Others are able to find a loophole in the law and market their booze as medicine. And then others are just simply saying, screw you, Uncle Sam, I'm going to keep making my booze. I don't really care what you say. And those were the bootleggers. And as for us here at Anchor, what were we doing during Prohibition? Well, according to our books from 1920 to 1933, which are completely blank, we were doing nothing here at Anchor Brewing Company, at least nothing according to the federal government. But if there's any doubt as to what we were actually doing during Prohibition, we were one of the only breweries, the only brewery to come back during Prohibition, or after Prohibition, and our beer was back on tap about a week after Prohibition was over. And for those who do not know, it takes roughly 4 weeks to make a beer. So pretty clear indicator without having to be an ultimate mathematician to figure out what we were doing during Prohibition, but our books were blank, so we had nothing provable in a court of law. So now, we come back making that same steam beer. Definitely thought, the worst was behind us, seeing that our product is no longer illegal and competition was eliminated. But that was a very short-lived celebration, because right at the tail end of Prohibition is when the Great Depression comes along, and the price of these ingredients right here, specifically this one right here, malted barley, they skyrocket in price. And that malted barley is where you're going to be getting your alcohol. So now breweries here in the United States are starting to transition into cheaper adjunct ingredients like rice and corn to get those fermentable sugars, and this gave birth to the American lager. Anchor did not want to make this switch. We wanted to stick with the traditional malted barley that's been making beer since the first civilization. We discovered making beer over 5,500 years ago in Sumeria. But that decision to essentially not sacrifice quality for quantity did come back to bite us. And in 1964, we ended with only $128 in our bank account. So it was pretty much curtains for us here at Anchor in the mid-60s. But very lucky for us, extremely lucky for us. I can't really stress you enough how lucky we are to still be in business today. Literally came down to the last few ounces of beer, and that is not an exaggeration. And so that story begins with a guy named Fritz Maytag, and he would frequent this bar in the Old Spaghetti Factory, in North Beach, called the Old Spaghetti Factory. And he would go there to get his usual steam beer, the only beer they had on tap at that Old Spaghetti Factory. The sign we have in our gift shop is actually the original sign from that location. And so he would go there, get his usual steam beer. Freddie Koo, who was the owner of the bar, poured up Fritz's usual steam, slid it across the bar, and told him to really enjoy and savor this one, because this is going to be his last pint. And this was truly going to be his last pint, because the Old Spaghetti Factory was the last holding account for Anchor beer. So this was truly, like I said, the last few ounces of beer that were being poured, and it could not have been poured for a better person. If you picked up on that last name of Maytag, that is no coincidence. His great-grandfather is Maytag Appliances, and his grandfather is Maytag Blue Cheese, the largest blue cheese producer in the United States out of Iowa. So quite the entrepreneurial background for this Mr. Maytag fellow. So Freddie tells him to head on down to 8th Street in Brandon to check out the brewery, and he finds this really, really run-down place, really just showing signs that they're about to be going out of business. But despite the state of the brewery, he decided to become 51% owner that day for just a hair over $2,000. So pretty small investment even for those times, especially given how expensive the city is nowadays. So, but despite that low cost, he definitely had his work cut out for him. Like I said, that brewery was a complete mess, so he had to get that in working order. And then second is he had to learn how to make beer. Just a very minor detail of when you purchase a brewery. So he went off to Europe, went to places like Germany, Belgium, UK, countries that have been known for making beer for centuries. Mainly from Germany, though, is mainly where he was getting that information. Brought that information back here to the United States, and in 1969 he bought out the remaining 49% of the brewery and started making his own beer. In 1971 now, it was time to start mending the reputation of Anchor. And first step in the right direction was to put steam beer in bottles. That was a huge deal for us here at the brewery, because we were really far behind in the take-home market by this point. And this is a good indicator to y'all, the public, that we were turning a new leaf here at Anchor. So that was 1971 when that came out. The following year of 1972, Fritz decided it was time to break the mold of those light fizzy American lagers, and he wanted to bring a style of beer back to the United States that he had discovered when he was over in Europe, and that style of beer was the porter. And this is a huge gamble on his part to try and introduce a style of beer like this back to the United States, because for the last 35 plus years, the only beer available in the US was American lagers. There was no craft beer movement or anything like that. So to introduce or to slide a black beer across the bar to a clear beer drinker, that was a very strange thing to do. But luckily, it paid off, literally. We turned a profit for the very first time with the Anchor Porter right there. That is also heralded as being the first craft beer in the United States post-Prohibition. And 75 is when we turned that profit. So to celebrate in that year, Fritz decided to keep that theme up of bringing back some extinct styles back to the United States. And he did that 3 more times in 1975. First was with the Liberty Ale, which is certainly not an extinct style anymore. That was the first IPA in the United States post-Prohibition. Second was the Old Foghorn Barley Wine, which was the first barley wine in the United States post-Prohibition. And then finally in 1975, Fritz came out with the Christmas Ale, which was the first winter seasonal beer here in the United States post-Prohibition. So these 4 beers right here really kicked off the craft beer movement that we're experiencing today of over 5,000 breweries nationwide. And it's all thanks to a guy who was just really pissed off his favorite beer was going away. So he decided to buy that brewery, learn how to make beer himself, and in turn started a revolution here in the United States. Pretty cool story. So a few more things about the Christmas Ale on the end there. It was originally called Our Special Ale. Still gets that nickname around the brewery. But the reason why it goes by Our Special Ale is because it gets a new recipe tweak every year, whether it's more cinnamon one year, more allspice another year, something along those lines. Typically it's going to be what you would imagine to be like a kind of a winter seasonal spice. And if you can think of one, we have probably already used it. This past year we added a little bit of vanilla and also bumped it up in alcohol by 1%. So along with that recipe tweak, it also gets a new label every year as well. And those are all hand-drawn by the same artist. His name is Jim Stitt. He lives out in a houseboat in Sausalito, and he's been doing every single one of our Christmas Ale labels from 1975 up until the one that just came out right there in 2016. We have those all available to look at in that case right there. The only year, however, that he did not do was 1976, the second run of the Christmas Ale. And the original plan was to do a new artist every year. that went haywire for whatever reason after 1 year, and we went back to Jim, and he's been doing them ever since. So now let's move it on to 1979. We're starting to outgrow ourselves over there on 7th and Brandon, starting to pick up some steam, if you will, pun very much intended. And we move into this building right here. If you have had any of our beer from 1979 up until the one you're all drinking right now, and that is not just limited to our steam beer, any of these beers here, any of these behind me, any in our retired case over there, as long as those have been brewed since 1979, they have been brewed out of those 3 kettles in that room right there and nowhere else in the world. This is our only production facility, and we are producing for all 50 states, 35 countries worldwide, all out of this building here, specifically out of those 3 kettles. So now moving on to 1984, 5 years of being in this location. To celebrate that anniversary, Fritz came out with another new beer. At the time went by the name of Summer Beer, now goes by the name of Summer Wheat. And that was the first filtered wheat beer here in the United States post-Prohibition. And around this time is really when you're going to start seeing the craft beer movement, if you will, start to take some shape, with other breweries starting to pop up around the U.S. like Sierra Nevada and Sam Adams. So now moving on to 1989, pardon me. That was the year of the second major earthquake here in San Francisco, and luckily for us, we did not burn down in the shakes of that quake like the first one, but we did lose power for about 3 or 4 hours, which was honestly the worst that had happened, so not too bad. But that did mean that the heat source that was boiling our wort in the brew house had been turned off and dropped in temperature by about 30 or 40 degrees, which was not the greatest news in the world, but it wasn't enough. We deemed it not enough to just completely throw it away. We ran it through all our tests, deemed it wasn't, too different. We just wrote it off as a very, very long protein rest. But to really kind of signify the earthquake, we labeled all those beers with an upside down steam beer label. Released them into the market, not really telling anybody why the labels were put on upside down. But once people figured out that that signified it was from the '89 earthquake, we had people like crazy coming by the brewery trying to get a hold of one of those bottles. And we did not exactly know what we had at the time, so we only have 2 of those left now. They are both in that case over there. One is right next to that old school steam beer 6-pack on the second row from the top. In my opinion, the coolest and rarest bottle in there, despite being our flagship and looking like a misprint, but the significance of that beer is pretty special here at Anchor and San Francisco as well. So moving on to 1993, Fritz is wanting to expand his alcohol portfolio, if you will, and decided to open up Anchor Distilling Company. Nowadays, we have 3 gins, 3 whiskeys, a vodka that we actually dry hop, so it's got a little bit of hoppiness to it, and also a winter seasonal spirit where we distill off the previous year's Christmas ale to make a white whiskey, which is called White Christmas. And those spirits are available pretty much exclusively here in the Bay Area. Some are going to trickle out into pretty much exclusively here in San Francisco, pardon me. Others are going to trickle out into other Bay Area cities, but for the most part here in the city, I did hear that we're starting to make our way out of California, which is awesome news, but the production on those is still very, very small, especially compared to our beer. To give you some perspective, we're packaging just in bottles about 400 to 500 barrels a day, whereas our spirits, we're producing 500 barrels a year, so much, much smaller production on our spirits than our beer. So moving on to the year 2000, Fritz is getting a little older, starting to think about retirement and selling the brewery. Not too terribly hard though, because it took him 10 years to find the proper buyers for the brewery. And the reason why it took so long was because he had 3 very strict terms. One, and most importantly, was that the brewery was to stay put here in San Francisco. Number 2 was that all of the employees were to keep their jobs. And number 3 was that the traditions of Anchor were to be upheld. He didn't want someone getting rid of what those beers that he created, taking the brewery in a different direction, or getting rid of the brewery as a whole. Definitely did not want to see that happen. So in 2010, he found those buyers in Keith Greger and Tony Folio. They are still under the helm with us today. They brought along Mark Carpenter as their Brew Master. Although he's been no stranger to us here at Anchor, he started here in 1971. That was the first year that we put steam beer in bottles. Also when he was a student at SF State. So now, he did retire. We have a new Brew Master now. He retired January of last year. So we have a new Brew Master. His name is Scott Ungerman. Very similar story. Worked here for many years. Most recently, before he was Brew Master, was running our production. So bottles, cans, kegs, things like that. And then eventually got that promotion to Brew Master January of 2016. So that is pretty much caught up to where we are today here at the brewery. Does anyone have any questions about our history? So welcome to the brew house here. This is where we're going to be starting the brewing processes for all of our beers here at Anchor. But before we get into that, a little bit about these kettles here. Fritz discovered these kettles when he was touring around Europe, learning how to make beer in Germany. Stumbled upon these kettles, decided to buy them, brought them back here to the United States, and we started using them when we moved into this building in 1979. These kettles were built in 1956, and they are 100% copper. So the main reason why we're using copper as opposed to the more industry standard stainless steel, one and most importantly, is because it was the metal of choice when this kettle was built back in the 50s. Much easier to make weird shapes like this and the much more malleable copper as opposed to stainless steel. And also, copper is a very sanitary metal. It's also very good at temperature management. It also supplies a little bit of micronutrient for the yeast come fermentation. So we're going to be adding 2 of the 4 main ingredients into this tank right here. Those ingredients are water and malted barley. So we're going to be adding about 1,000 gallons of water up this pipe right here. Simultaneously, we're adding about 6,000 pounds of malted barley down this pipe right here. So that malted barley is a barley seed or a barley grain that has been germinated, dried out, and in turn very rich in protein and starches. And we want to get all those proteins and starches out of there in this tank right here. So to do that, we're going to run that grain through our mill, which is on the other side of that wall there. That mill is going to crack the outer husk of that grain so that the water can actually get inside and start breaking down all those proteins and starches and converting them into sugar. So by the end of this, after about an hour and a half to 2 hours, we're going to have a very sweet oatmeal-like substance, which is called mash. So that would make this here our mash tun. T-U-N tun is just another word for kettle. So once this is done here in the mash tun, we're going to pipe this into the ladder tun in the back there, where we're going to start the separation process of the liquid from the solid. We're going to do so by opening up the bottom of that tank there. It's called a false bottom. Just think of it as a giant colander. It's going to let all that liquid pass through. It's going to catch all the solid grain on the bottom there. Once it has passed through, all that grain is going to be collected on the bottom of that tank, so we need to get that out of there. So we're physically going to hop into that tank, scoop all that grain out, and we're going to have a dairy farmer come by our facility multiple times a week to pick up that grain, take it back to his farm, and use it as feed for his cattle. That goes for all of our spent material here at the brewery, whether it's spent yeast, spent hops, or that spent grain from the ladder tun. Once that is done, that liquid that is now free of grain, very sweet liquid, is called wort. And that's going to be going through our grain, which is along this back wall here. You can see all those bubbles forming there. You can also see that little sight right there that's glowing orange. That is because that wort is actively passing through the grain right now, and that sight is allowing us to observe that wort to make sure that there's not too much leftover particulate from the ladder tun in the back. So once that is going through the grain, it's going to come out those spigots, go across that trough, and then into the brewer's kettle right here. Also, that grain is a very, very old school piece of equipment. The majority of breweries that are still using the grain today are breweries that are hundreds of years old in Europe. I honestly cannot name a single American brewery that is using grain like that. Very, very old school piece of equipment. So once it gets into the brewer's kettle here, that's where we're going to bring it up to a boil for the very first time. That boil is going to sterilize that wort. It's also going to reduce it down, get rid of some of that excess water, make it more of a concentrated sugar. Also, we're going to be adding the third ingredient into the mix, which is hops. And those hops are going to be adding some bitterness to this beer to balance out, the sweetness of that grain in here with the bitterness of those hops. So we're going to be adding the addition of those hops. You can see in this can right here, got it weighed out, ready to go. And we're just going to manually dump it into this tank, and it's just going to do its thing, get the bitterness out of there. Some of our beers, like our pale ales and IPAs, we're going to be adding a second round of hops downstairs in fermentation in a much, much cooler environment. And that's where we're going to get the aroma and flavor of those hops, not so much the bitterness. So simply put, if you cook hops, you're getting the bitterness. If you just steep them in room temperature water, you're going to get the aroma and flavor out of those hops. So once that is all done, we're going to send that downstairs. Hops get separated, hops are headed off to the farm, and then the wort is going to go around the corner to primary fermentation, where it's going to start cooling down, getting ready for the final ingredient, which is yeast. That yeast is going to start breaking down all the sugars that we extracted from the brew house, and it's going to convert those sugars into alcohol and CO2. You can visually see that CO2 production starting by the bubbles, starting to form on the top of that tank there. While that is going on, it's going to be going on for 1 or 3 days, and then after that 1 or 3 days, we're going to be blending those 2 different days together to start the carbonation process for those beers downstairs. Once that is all done, we're going to drain these tanks out, collect all the yeast that's left over at the bottom of the tank, and we're going to recycle that yeast, keep reusing it for many batches to come. And our vessel in the center of those tanks there is our yeast culture for our ales. Not for our ales, for our lagers. This is our lager room here. Down the hall is our ale, but we'll see that in just a second. But we've been using these same two strains of yeast, ale and lager, for the last 50 years, pretty much since Fritz Maytag took over the brewery back in the 60s. And that strain has remained unchanged this whole entire time. Once that is done, collecting all that yeast, we're going to physically hop into these tanks, clean them out, get it ready for the next batch, and keep that cycle moving. So welcome to secondary fermentation. This is where we're going to be continuing that fermentation process from upstairs. But unlike upstairs, where that CO2 is going up into that room, the CO2 is being kept into this tank. It is being reabsorbed by the beer, and it is naturally carbonating that beer in a very traditional German method of fermentation, which is called kreuzening. So that kreuzening process entails the blending of those two different days from upstairs. So we're going to take that 3-day-old beer, and we're going to fill it up about 85% of the way. Then we're going to take the 1-day-old beer, and we're going to fill it up that remaining 15%. That's going to introduce some new sugar to the mix and new yeast as well. The alcohol has already been fairly established from upstairs, so it's mainly focusing on the production of that CO2. If any of you are homebrewers here, you're adding a priming sugar to get that carbonation going in your CO2. We're using that 1-day-old wort, that very sugary wort, as our priming sugar to get the carbonation of those beers. So once that is, or while that is going on, I should say, it's going to be kept at the ideal temperature of fermentation for that beer, which is 50 degrees for lagers and 70 degrees for ales. Steam beer, however, is right in the middle at about 60 degrees. And the reason why steam beer is not fermented at lager temperature, despite being a lager, is because back in the day when they were making them here in San Francisco, they simply could not get it cold enough and had to settle with the ambient temperature of San Francisco, which is about 60 to 65 degrees. So that's what really makes steam beer unique, is the fact that it is a lager beer fermented at ale temperatures. Also, steam beer was the first time that a new style of beer had been invented here in the United States by Americans. Every other type of beer that was here before, for example, George Washington's favorite beer was the porter, those were all styles that were brought over from Europe, and the steam beer was the very first time that this was truly a new invented style of beer here in the United States. So while that fermentation is going on at that ideal temperature, we're going to be adding hops into the mix for the second time into some of our beers in that dry hopping process to get the aroma and flavor out of those hops. This beer here, I believe, is our Retro IPA, one of our new beers, and that is going to be getting that dry hopping as well, with it being that IPA. Just think any hoppy beer that you've had is guaranteed getting that addition of hops here in secondary fermentation. So once that is done, we're going to turn the ice on the sides of these tanks here, much like you see on this one here. That is going to drop the temperature down to 35 degrees and stop that fermentation process. So it's going to stop the production of alcohol and CO2. Then we're going to send that into our pasteurization filtration on the other side of those double doors there, get all that pasteurized and filtered, and then send it upstairs. That pasteurization process and that dry hopping process were both introduced to beer making here in the United States by Fritz Maytag. Dry hopping with just kind of a technique he was wanting to try, and also the pasteurization was because of his dairy background with Maytag blue cheese. So once that is all pasteurized and filtered, headed upstairs for packaging, bottles, cans, kegs, out to distribution, all 50 states, 35 countries worldwide.
All right, Justin, that was an awesome tour we had today.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm so glad we got to try some amazing beers. But now comes the time that we tell you guys which ones our favorites were.
All right, so I got to start off, guys, just with the reverence of this place. It's one of the originals. It is the original. I mean, craft beer was born here. You can't get much better than that. You can see where we're going by where we came from, and this is the heart of where we came from. And there are just so many to choose from. Everything is delicious. If you haven't had the Anchor Steam, make sure you buy a 6-pack of that. If you see anything else from Anchor Brewing, buy any of that. But my favorite has to be the Anchor Porter. I mean, it's one of the original craft beers that came out of this place, and it's just rich in chocolate malt. It is so original. It's the heart of what a porter is. take out everything else, the vanilla, all the other frou-frou, and everything that makes every other's unique. This is the original. This is the OG, and it is so, so delicious. Jeff?
I totally agree with you. That porter was incredible. Natural malts. It's not using any fancy tricks to get the flavor out. It's old school, original. It's one of a kind. I mean, I don't think I've ever had a porter like that. You really get to understand and love that beer style because of the way that they made it. Now, I will tell you, I'm an IPA guy through and through. So if I was gonna have to pick a favorite beer that I've had here today, it's gonna be the Liberty Ale. And the reason why is because that is one of the first post-prohibition dry hopped beers. I think that is so awesome because being a home brewer, I can really respect the craft of dry hopping, and Anchor does such a great job at really telling the people that drink their beers that they're representing history. It's light, it's refreshing, it's not overly hoppy like the typical West Coast style IPAs that we have on a regular basis. It's literally saying, here's where all of this came from. Give it a try. It'll help you understand every pale ale that you have from here on out.
The Wall Street Journal did an article recently where they said that the Liberty Ale is probably the most important craft beer ever brewed. We can see why it became that and where everything came from that beer. And just enjoying everything that we had. If you see Anchor Brewing at all, pick it up. If you get a chance to come to San Francisco, make sure you visit here. This is your history. If you're a beer lover, this is where we began. And just make sure you get to enjoy the heck out of this place because we sure did.
Yes. Alright guys, we had an awesome time here at Anchor Brewing Company. Thank you, Mike, for the hospitality. You gave us an awesome tour. I love seeing an original piece of craft beer right here. We love the beers that we tried. This is such an amazing place. If you find yourself in San Francisco, you have to visit this brewery.
We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And we will see you guys next time on Let's Have Some Beer. Cheers.
Cheers.